I'm Morgyn Wood, and here's your 8-minute and 46-second recap on week 3 of seeking justice for George Floyd, the Derek Chauvin Trial. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is on trial for the death of George Floyd after kneeling on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. The incident happened on May 25, 2020, outside of Cup Foods at the intersection of East 38th and Chicago Avenue in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The third week of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, and Monday, April 12th, was the 11th day of the trial. Court proceedings began with Judge Peter Cahill denying a motion to sequester the jury. This comes after the fatal police shooting of a 20-year-old black man named Daunte Wright that happened over the weekend.
I understand the argument from the defense that this now puts them even more ill at ease, but I think sequestering them would only aggravate that. Oh, I heard about the civil unrest and now the judge is putting us into sequestration. There must be a greater threat to our security. I think the better way is to just continue with the trial as we've been going, that's a separate issue. They should treat it as such. It'd be a different story if it was civil unrest following another verdict.
Then Dr. Jonathan Rich took the witness stand. He's a cardiologist expert witness who indicated in his testimony that George Floyd likely died from low oxygen. He testified that he watched video of George Floyd's behavior from the time he was in Cup Foods up until his interaction with police officers. Dr. Rich said there was no evidence George Floyd was dealing with any kind of medical emergency before his interaction with the police officers.
In this case, Mr. George Floyd died from a cardiopulmonary arrest. It was caused by low oxygen levels, and those low oxygen levels were induced by the prone restraint and positional asphyxiation that he was subjected to.
Then the court heard an emotional testimony from George Floyd's brother, Philonise Floyd. He talked about what it was like growing up with his big brother, his athletic ability, and the love that he had for their mother.
George, he loved his mom. He will always just be up on her. And, you know, every mother loves all of her kids, but it was so unique how they were with each other. He would lay up on her in the fetus position like he was still in a womb.
Then Seth Stoughton was the last witness to take the stand on Monday. He's a law professor at the University of South Carolina. He testified on the use of force and said that it was the restraints by the officers that caused George Floyd's death.
Both the knee across Mr. Floyd's neck and the prone restraint were unreasonable, excessive, and contrary to generally accepted police practices.
On Tuesday, the state rested their case and the defense called their first witness to the stand. Retired Minneapolis police officer Scott Cretin testified for the defense that he arrested George Floyd as a passenger during a traffic stop back on May 6th of 2019.
He won't listen to what I have to say. Put your hands on your head. Put them on your head. Top of your head. Okay, man. Open your mouth. Spit out what you got. Spit out what you got.
Then Michelle Mosing, a retired Hennepin County paramedic, took the witness stand next. She indicated in her testimony that she treated George Floyd after that traffic stop on May 6th, 2019.
Okay, so he told you that he had taken a pill at the time the officers were apprehending him.
Correct.
Did you do a physical assessment of Mr. Floyd at that time?
Yes.
Specifically, did you take his blood pressure?
Yes, I took a set of vitals.
Then the court heard testimony from Shawanda Hill, George Floyd's ex-girlfriend. She was called to the witness stand after running into George Floyd on May 25, 2020. She was at Cup Foods to get her phone fixed when he offered to give her a ride home. She was questioned about his behavior when she ran into him that day.
When we were in the car for the first 8 minutes, we were talking and, hugging, talking about what we were about to do. And then I got a phone call. And so I was on the phone for the rest of the time until the little boys came to the car. He fell asleep at that time.
The court then heard testimony from Peter Chang. He's a Minneapolis Park police officer who was nearby. He said he responded to the call at Cup Foods to support Minneapolis PD. Nicole McKenzie took the witness stand again, the MPD medical support coordinator. She was asked to describe what excited delirium means and to elaborate on what causes it.
Would you defer to an emergency room doctor on whether someone is actually experiencing excited delirium?
Absolutely. It's not our place to diagnose that.
Then the court heard testimony from Barry Broad, a use of force expert for the defense. He testified that because George Floyd had drugs in his system, he most likely did not feel pain and had superhuman strength. He went on to say that Chauvin's actions were reasonable.
I felt that Officer Chauvin's interactions with Mr. Floyd were following his training and were objectively reasonable.
Then on Wednesday, day 13 of the trial proceedings began with Maurice Hall invoking his Fifth Amendment right not to testify in the trial out of fear of self-incrimination. He was with George Floyd on May 25th and was the other passenger in the car when officers first approached. Hall's attorney told the court that her client cannot place himself inside the SUV because that would open him up to a third-degree murder charge. Following that, defense attorney Eric Nelson motioned for an acquittal, but Judge Peter Cahill denied that motion. Then the defense called controversial witness Dr. David Fowler to the stand. He's a former Maryland chief medical examiner who indicated in his testimony that George Floyd's enlarged heart, previous drug use, and exhaust from the police squad car likely played a role in George Floyd's death. He testified that in his medical opinion, George Floyd had a cardiac arrhythmia, which is more of a sudden event as opposed to a gradual event, as previously stated by Dr. Baker.
To your knowledge, was Mr. Floyd's blood tested for carbon monoxide?
I could not find a reference to it now.
Dr. Fowler is being accused in Maryland of helping police cover up the death of a young black man. Then on Thursday, proceedings started with Derek Chauvin invoking his Fifth Amendment right not to testify in his murder trial.
I will invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege today.
Then the court had a hearing as the state tried to admit new evidence regarding carbon monoxide test results. This comes after Dr. Fowler suggested in his testimony that carbon monoxide from the police squad car could have played a role in George Floyd's death. It's important to note that even though the test results happened back in May of 2020 when George Floyd was brought in, it was not included in the already admitted evidence, despite being subpoenaed. Defense attorney Eric Nelson told Judge Peter Cahill that he would be moved to motion for a mistrial if the new evidence was allowed to be admitted. As he indicated, the state was notified back in February that Dr. Fowler would present carbon monoxide as a key factor in George Floyd's death, thus giving the state plenty of time to subpoena any necessary test results they needed for their case. Ultimately, Judge Peter Cahill found it to be unethical to admit the new evidence, and the defense rested their case. The state was permitted to call a rebuttal witness to the stand with limited testimony. Pulmonologist Dr. Martin Tobin was called to the witness stand again. He was questioned about Dr. Fowler's testimony regarding carbon monoxide playing a role in George Floyd's death.
Hemoglobin is saturated at 98%. It tells you all there was for everything else is 2%. And so the maximum amount of carbon monoxide would be 2%.
The state then rested their case, and Judge Peter Cahill made an announcement to the jurors that they would be sequestered to deliberate on Monday, April 19th. The judge told the jury to pack for a long stay but hope for a short one. Then on Friday afternoon, Judge Peter Cahill held a charge conference, a meeting of all parties in which they determined how to instruct the jury.
All right, I think we've made a record of pretty much what the different positions were. Some I've indicated what we are going to do. Some, the rest are going to be under advisement. Mr. Schaefer and I will put our heads together, come up with a draft to hopefully get it to you tonight, but let me promise by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
And that's your 8-minute and 46-second recap on week 3 of Seeking Justice for George Floyd, the Derek Chauvin Trial. I'm Morgyn Wood on the Black Information Network.